18 million people arrested for marijuana charges, have a marijuana conviction, a misdemeanor, whatever it might be. That's terrible. Right? I like the subculture that's developed around marijuana. It's a beautiful, wonderful subculture in America. So much of it is about, entrepreneurialism. It's about the capitalist spirit. It's about taking care of your own. It's about standing up for freedom. And does that mean that if we make it legal, we lose this stuff? On the other hand, 800,000 people a year getting arrested, and the prospects of what happens with organized crime getting involved in an ugly way down the road. So I'll tell you, I'm very ambivalent. I mean, I know that we need to get away from the war on marijuana. I know that we have to decriminalize. I know that we have to make legal the possession of marijuana. I know that we need to make legal the ability to grow for your own and for others, etc. Right? The question is, do we go all the way? My organization is on record, as is normal, as is NPP, is saying go all the way. But there's those moments when I have my doubts. I do know we got to fight this battle. And I do know that even when we fight for legalizing marijuana in a state, and even if you win it in Montana in 2 years, because of federal prohibition, it's still going to remain effectively decriminalized in some ways. I do know that the best way to protect patients and to reduce these arrests is to make this stuff legal. So I know that there's going to be a point in the future when we will start to fight among ourselves about what the optimal policy is. I look forward to that fight, because that will mean that we have succeeded in getting to the point where that fight actually makes sense. Until that point, let's not fight. Right? I mean, one thing I know about trying to build a drug law reform movement is that oftentimes the people you find that you hate the most, you can't stand the most, are your allies. Because you know them too well, and you work with them. And you'll end up, exchanging boyfriends or girlfriends, or competing for turf, or screwing one another, or it's credit, or somebody's just an asshole, and they happen to be involved in the thing, or whatever it might be. But keeping our eye on the prize, so that we can stop this oppression around marijuana and the broader drug war, and disempower the prison-industrial complex, is a fight worth fighting for. And it's a fight worth trying to bring out from ourselves what we possibly can. Because when you get involved, when you get involved in the struggle for freedom and for justice, when you get involved in fighting against irrationality embedded in criminal laws that land up hurting people, you feel good. It's the good fight. Yeah. We are on the right side of history on this stuff. And I want to say also, it's not just about marijuana. Right? We all know meth is meth, right? Or maybe not quite, but it's meth. Right? Montana, whatever, all of this thing, right? But the fact, and I'm not saying that the policy for meth should be the same as marijuana. I don't envision that. It's a different thing. But I don't think anybody should go to prison or jail or lose their freedom or lose their job simply for what we put into our bodies if we don't hurt anybody else. Core principle that nobody deserves to be punished, nobody deserves to be discriminated against or amongst based upon what we put into our bodies if we don't hurt another soul. That principle seems to be vital. It is the core of the entire movement for ending marijuana prohibition. It is the core of the drug policy reform movement. It is the core of the harm reduction movement. It's the core of basically the next phase, the next front of fighting for freedom in America. I mean, if I really want to get radical about this, I'll say that principle that I and you, that we are each sovereign over our own minds and bodies, that principle is, I don't know if there's anything more vital. I mean, if you look, what is the greatest thing about America in some respects? I would argue it's the Bill of Rights, and especially our First Amendment. Our First Amendment rights of press, religion, assembly, and speech. Right? Now, we know that every one of those, you don't have an absolute right. You don't have the right to, you have a First Amendment freedom of speech, but you can't fire in a crowded theater, right? You have the right of free press, but you can't libel somebody. You got the right of freedom of religion, but you can't engage in bizarre sacrifices. You have the right of assembly, you can't assemble a mob. But nonetheless, we built an amazing nation around the notion that these are core fundamental freedoms, and that we are willing to give that freedom the benefit of the doubt and defer to that freedom more than almost any other society. Now ask yourself, do those freedoms really mean anything if they don't assume some underlying right of consciousness over what's here, of what goes in here? I mean, think about it. That right not to be punished for what we put in our body, and also not to be punished for what we refuse to put in our body. Because in the evolving society, more and more we're going to be encountering our government and employers saying what you have, not just what you can take, but what you have to take. That principle needs to be articulated, that core principle. I don't hear politicians say it, but it has to be said. It has to be said. So look, it's not just the marijuana thing. I never say, let's legalize marijuana so we can gang up on the meth folks or gang up on the heroin dealers. I don't say that. Maybe the violent criminals, I even try to avoid things. I don't want to give the prison industrial complex any more power. But we found, not only did we find that the public was willing to support legal, medical marijuana, we also found that the public supported two other things. They supported treatment instead of incarceration for people with addiction, and we won a huge initiative in California around that. And you know what else we found? The asset forfeiture laws. The right of the police and prosecutors to seize property if it's been criminally derived. Well, everybody supports that. They don't want thieves keeping the property. But there's two things the public doesn't like. The first one is, when they hear and understand that the police and prosecutors can seize your property without a criminal conviction, just on say-so, just on suspicion, the ordinary American goes, wait a second. And when they hear that the police and prosecutors get to keep the seized property for their own departments, they go, no way. So a few years ago, back in 2000, we did 2 ballot initiatives in Oregon and Utah. And we built coalitions from the civil liberties and the liberals on one side to the property owners and the Republicans or whatever, and the gun owners on the right side. And we won both these initiatives by 2 to 1 to say that if property is going to be seized, it's got to be only after criminal conviction. And then if you're going to take that property, it doesn't go to the cops or the prosecutors. It's got to go to public schools or the general treasury or back into the taxpayer's pocket.